Hello and welcome to La Rosa Reads. I'm Denise La Rosa, and today I am super excited to share with all of my book-loving friends the books that I read in September of 2022. Let's talk books. All right, so here we are in the month of October. But in the month of September, I have to say, it was a really solid reading month. I was pleasantly surprised at the books that I ended up picking up and reading and exploring. And I feel like it was an eclectic mix. It kind of reminded me of I believe it was March or April reading month of this year. So without any further ado, let's dive in to the books that I read in the month of September. You guys, Before the Coffee Gets Cold just warmed my heart, touched me deeply, and so, of course, I was going to read its sequel, Tales from the Cafe. Let's take a moment to appreciate this wonderful cover with the cute kitty boo and all the things. The only thing I'm missing here with the sequel's cover is the coffee. Like, where's the coffee cup? I don't know, but nonetheless, this book really gave me a nice feeling of nostalgia. I read Before the Coffee Gets Cold in the month of March of 2022, and here it is September. I knew that I would want to read the sequel in one of those chilly yet cozy months of the year, and we get much the same with this book as we did with Before the Coffee Gets Cold. We have some recurring characters, we have some new characters, and a collection of short stories that are so deeply moving, just evoking so many emotions in you. You will smile, you will cry. And again, we have those perimeters around this wonderful cafe in Japan that has the ability to allow its patrons to time travel. And there's some stipulations around it. And one of the stipulations that's really powerful is that you cannot change anything. So when you go back in time, anything that you say and do will not change the present moment. So if you had a loved one who passed, traveling back in time isn't going to prevent them from dying. We also learned that there is another ability that this cafe has. It has the ability to have its patrons travel into the future. However, a lot of people just feel like that's a waste of time and don't even try because you don't know if the people or the person that you want to see in the future has visited that cafe. And that is a key element. Like, the person who you are visiting in the past or the future had to have been someone who has visited the cafe before. So we do see someone travel into the future at this cafe in Tales from the Cafe. It wasn't as moving as the first collection of short stories because it was much the same. So it was very predictable. There was one story that moved me probably more than the others. So if you're just looking to have a melancholy read, I highly recommend it. Start with Before the Coffee Gets Cold and then travel to Tales from the Cafe. Woo! The next book I read, or I don't think I'm reading these or sharing these in order, so I don't know. The point is, this was the second book I read in the month of September, and it is titled My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey. I had never read a Tessa Bailey book before, and she is a romance novelist, and let me just say, I was not prepared for the spice. As a 41-year-old married person, it was hot, steamy, wild, and then some. I thought the cozy mystery genre, like part of the reading experience, was going to be lifted up more than the romance. It was not. In my humble opinion, the sexual tension between our main characters, this bounty hunter and second grade teacher, definitely prevailed and was spotlighted more than the cozy mystery element. So we have this character, and I'm forgetting her name, but she's a second grade teacher, and she and her brother decide to go on vacation, renting a house in an Airbnb type of, agency. And once they get there, they discover there is a dead man in the basement. And so this bounty hunter comes along to help out with solving this murder mystery. And of course, as you can tell from the cover, sparks fly. There's a lot of tension. I wouldn't say enemies to lovers, but there was a lot of playful back and forth, some intense feelings. The mystery part was fine. Very predictable, but entertaining. Am I going to read another Tessa Bailey book? For me personally, I don't need the kinky spice. I really don't when I'm reading a mystery or a romance novel. So I'm not sure that I'm on board with Tessa Bailey, but nonetheless, this was a nice little read, sort of. Then I had a surprise read that just gave me all the feels and then some. So I had ventured to my local Barnes & Noble, which is less than a mile from my house, which is super dangerous for my bank account. And they had the buy one, get one half off sale that they always have. And this book just kind of called to me. I had never heard of this book before, but the cover just left me intrigued. The authors are some some YA authors whom I'm familiar with. And so I picked up Blackout. This is a collection of short stories written by some dynamic authors who are really well-versed and just incredible at writing young adult pieces that are around the Black experience. And so we have the setting being in Manhattan, the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Harlem, and there is the blackout. So all the power goes out, and as someone who was living in New York City in 2003 during that blackout, this gave me so many memories, you guys. I'm not someone who carries cash with me, and I learned the hard way on that day in 2003 that I probably should always have some cash on hand. I ended up being stranded in New York City for over 12 hours, but had some strangers that turned into friends, and we had a grand old time and partied, and I made it back to my apartment around 4 o'clock the next morning. So it was an experience to remember, and we have characters, these young adults of color who are crossing paths. What I love about this collection of short stories is that some of the characters cross over from one story to the next. Some of them don't know each other. However, they're all headed towards the same block party in Brooklyn later that night that was planned and is still going to go down despite the blackout. And so everyone's headed in the same direction, but what has brought them to that place is just an incredible journey to read about for all of these characters. The characters are dynamic, they're compelling. You just fall in love with them. I love this book. I think it's going to be my top favorites of the year. I feel like Katie could be a co-star of La Rosa Reads because I talk about her so much. Katie loaned me this wonderful arc, Lotus Bloom and the Afro Revolution by Sherry Winston. This is the author of, I think it's President of the Whole 5th Grade, President of the Whole 6th Grade. We have the 6th grade book here at our house. We just haven't read it yet. And Lotus Bloom, in all of her glory here on the cover, is this talented violinist who lives in Florida, in the inner cities of Florida, like a city in Florida. I don't remember exactly what city. And she goes to this school, a predominantly Black school, that is lacking resources. The building, the materials, everything is just subpar and just not well suited for these students' learning experience. And her talent actually takes her to earning a spot at a new school for performing arts that kind of took the funds from that inner city school and funneled it into this new performing arts school. And her best friend, Rebel, is really an activist, a young activist who thinks this is incredibly unfair and gives her friend Lotus a hard time for kind of turning her back on her classmates and going to this school that took so much from their home school. And in parallel to that story is this character Lotus, who has parents who have divorced, and her father's a musician that has moved to Paris. And she's just kind of stuck with a father who is really promoting and encouraging her musical gifts, while her mother is like, that's a waste of time. You need to get, focus on real schooling and learning. She wants her daughter to not have this big afro and just kind of like play by the rules. And so you see this young woman who evolves and taps into her inner strength in a way that she didn't even know this inner strength existed. And it's delightful. I think it's really good. It's really sweet. I think my daughters will read it eventually, so I'm glad that I've already read the book. Kudos to Sherry Winston. This book was released in the month of September, and I believe it's shortlisted or longlisted rather for a prize. I don't remember exactly which one. So I think it's well deserved. It's a great book. I highly recommend you pick it up. And then there was Colleen Hoover. I had never read a Colleen Hoover book until the month of September 2022, and my first Colleen Hoover read was Verity. I'm not going to get into too many details about this because this deserves its own video, right? So we're going to give it its due to kind of unpack my reading experience with my first Colleen Hoover book. What I will say is Verity is a woman who is an author, a mother of 3 children, a wife, and she ends up in a tragic accident and needs some help finishing a book series that she has begun. She has 3 books left in the series, and so her husband hires an unknown D-list author to help out with finishing that series because Verity is pretty much incapacitated, unable to follow through with that task. So the D-list author ends up at Verity's house, and it gets a little creepy, a little dark. Not a little dark, a whole lot dark. It was such a dark, disturbing book. And that is all I got to say about that until I make a video about the book, Verity. Am I on the Colleen Hoover train? You'll just have to watch that video to find out. A. Marie's Book Club. I love you for so many reasons, and I feel like I've said this a million times, but it deserves to be said 1,000,001 times on my channel. A. Marie does an incredible job of having me go outside my comfort zone with books. This book, What We Fed to the Manticore, is not a book that I would have even thought about picking up. I probably wouldn't have even noticed it. It was actually hard to get a copy. It was released in the month of September, but it wasn't a book that was just readily available in stores. I had to kind of like dig deep and pre-order, or it was hard to get. So this is a debut novel, which is mind-blowing because Talia Lakshmi Kaluri is just one of the most impeccable, gifted writers that I have had the privilege of reading this year. This is a collection of short stories told from animals' perspectives. It gives me legend vibes, some of those stories that we enjoy so much as young people, like how did the fox get its tail? I don't know. It doesn't go into... It's just so good. I'm almost at a loss for words. It's so good because these animals are just... You see they're living things, right? And we don't really take the time to think about what their lived experiences are like. How do they perceive humans? How do they perceive their environment and some of the traumatic things like war that's happening around them? How are they perceiving that? How are they interacting with each other across, different species of animals? And I teared up. It's hard for me to cry lately, but I teared up with nearly every story. The relationship between a dog and a rhino, the relationship between a donkey and 2 tigers. It is simply a must-read book. Even if you aren't someone who typically is an advocate for animals, I'm telling you, after you read this book, you're going to want to volunteer at some kind of animal shelter or something. You're going to want to do something with animals. This book is incredible. The short stories are amazing. Please, please, please pick it up and tell your friends. The first book that I read in the month of September was Acts of Violet. Margarita Montemore, I knew nothing about her as an author, as in general. And Una Out of Order is a book that I believe I kind of saw in passing, but gave no thought to. However, this cover just grabbed my attention when I was at a bookstore, and I just felt like this was the perfect kind of cozy fall read, because we have Violet, who is a magician who like legit disappears, and then 10 years later, on the 10-year anniversary of her disappearance, a podcaster decides to cover the story, and I should say uncover, the story that led up to Violet's disappearance, and maybe try to figure out what happened to her. Violet's sister plays a huge role in this piece, in this book, and she has some conflicting feelings about her sister. Her sister wasn't the best sister emotionally to have, but yet she loves her nonetheless and misses her. This book, the ending was so disappointing. I don't want to give anything away, but it's like, you have a magician who legit disappears, is gone for 10 years. I'm going to ask you guys, like, what would you expect for the ending? Some kind of resolution, or to at least know where, like, for the reader to know where she is, and even if the characters don't know. And then also, it was so about her physical disappearance and her life story and some traumas she experienced, and then unexpectedly it turns paranormal. And I'm like, this book wasn't paranormal until like the last 10 pages. Like, what? I mean, maybe a little bit before, but I was frustrated at the ending, and it kind of started to drag. We just heard a lot about Violet and her personality, but then the ending, it wasn't supported by that. I'm like, why did I need to know all those things about Violet whenever it had nothing to do with the ending? I could have done it without it. I wouldn't recommend this book, but whatevs. It's over now. And I listened to one audiobook this month, and it was Stories from the Tenants Downstairs, written by Sadiq Fofana. And I have to say, you guys, this book was everything I expected it to be. This is going to be an award-winning book. It's brilliant in its concept. We have this building in Brooklyn, and the short stories each are about tenants that reside in that building and how some of their lives intersect, some do not. And it just reminds you that, you're surrounded by stories, right? You're surrounded by people who have stories, and some parts of their stories you are aware of and some you are not. And so when you're passing people by, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they are currently going through, what they've been through in the past, what they're about to experience. And you should really be empathetic and understanding. And it helps you to also understand, this book also helps you to understand why people make the choices that they make, which reminds me of something I said about another book in the past. So I love books that help you to see the humanity in individuals, and explain why they engage in certain acts that they engage in. And so I loved it. I love how the audiobook was read by a bunch of different narrators, including the author. I enjoyed them being into character. Miss Dallas was my favorite. She was a paraprofessional at a local high school, Sojourner Truth High School. Oh, my Lord. As an educator, it was like giving. I have worked at schools like from a broad range, from charter schools, public schools, independent schools. And I just had such a love for her story. And I love that it went into several chapters, several short stories told through different perspectives. So I highly recommend the audiobook of Stories from the Tenants Downstairs. I think the narrators really bring the story to life. I loved it, and I think you will too. Here we are with all the books, not including the audiobook I read in the month of September. I'm curious, what did you read in the month of September? Let me know by hopping over to the comment section below. I love chatting it up with all of you. And also, please, my friends, check out what I plan to read in the month of October by checking out my October TBR video. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.